Hello everyone, Reginald Scott here. Welcome to the video. I hope you're all doing well. And today's video is going to be all about road tubeless and why I personally wouldn't switch to road tubeless, my reasons, my ideas on that subject. And hopefully this video is useful to everyone who is umming and ahhing or considering switching from standard tubes over to a road tubeless system. Now, obviously, my opinions are very personal to me and based on my circumstances, my experiences, my equipment, and my desires as a cyclist or what I want to get out of my equipment. They may not apply to you, and that's absolutely fine, but hopefully the information nonetheless is useful to everybody. So the reason this question came up and the reason I wanted to do a separate video on it is because I recently did a review of these, which are the Ride Now TPU tubes. Best product I've used in, well, ever. And I absolutely love these things. I think they're great. And invariably the question comes up, well, why don't you switch to tubeless? Because tubeless is viewed to some respects as being a superior system, as being a natural progression in road cycling nowadays. So when I look at road tubeless, I have a little chart in my head that I think of and I assess for whether it's worth it for me to switch over. And that chart is as follows. Oh, before I tell you, could you just like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, comment below, all that good stuff on this video. I really appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you so much. Okay, on with the chart. Cost, time, convenience, performance, safety, 5 factors. And when I assess those 5 factors, what I find is that actually the system I'm running right now is superior, it's better. And for me and my circumstances, it works well. So my circumstances are, I tend to run narrow tires. These are the kind of tires I run, 23 millimeters. I run them predominantly on road surfaces. I like to ride fast. I use high pressures. And basically, I like to do a little bit of competitive riding, a little bit of exploring, long distance riding, as it were, a little bit of racing. And so that setup suits me really well. So let's look at the cost first of all, because that's the first factor. Right now, I've already invested my money in this system, which is clincher tire and TPU tubes. Okay. Now, this is the most, or one of the most expensive systems you can run next to latex. I would say latex can be a bit more expensive, and it's certainly a lot more time consuming. The butyl is definitely the easiest and the cheapest system to run, but it has the most disadvantages of all the tube systems. Like I say, I've now switched to the TPU, and although it's a little bit more costly than butyl initially, it probably averages out over time because the repair kits for these are very cheap and they come with a lot of patches. The repair kits for these TPU tubes come with 12 patches, and I average probably about 3 to 4 punctures a year. In the last 8 months, I've had 3 punctures, okay? So I'm heading towards hitting my usual yearly amount of 4 punctures a year, okay? Now, for me to repair those 4 punctures is exceedingly simple and exceedingly cheap. If I was to then switch to tubeless, I would have to ditch these tubes, which I've already bought. I'd have to ditch all the inner tubes. I'd have to get myself some tubeless tires. I'd have to get myself some tubeless tape, maybe some tubeless filling kits, some of the sealant, for example, and maybe some additional equipment, like my bike pump, for example, is designed for filling clincher tires and tubes. It might not be up to the job of that, high pressure that we need initially to seat the tubeless tires. So I might have to get a bike pump with the additional bladder on it, or the additional reservoir on it, or maybe use my compressor or something like that, right? So the cost for somebody just starting out is quite high, the initial cost. Then you've got to look at running costs. So most people out there, most industry shills like David Arthur or GCN will tell you that, you should go tubeless. It's the best thing since sliced bread. But what they don't tell you about is the on costs. So with most tubeless systems, especially where I live, where there's very high humidity, what you need to do is you need to replace the sealant on a fairly regular interval, at least every 6 months. You need to top off the sealant because it starts to dry out. And obviously, you're basically adding a sealant to the tire. But eventually, like all the sealant turns into a sort of a homogeneous ball of goo, inside your tire, and then in that case you need to take the tire off, wash the thing out, clean the thing out, replace all the sealant and go again. Sometimes you have to also replace the tape. So the maintenance of tubeless tires throughout the year for me is going to be a lot of maintenance, and it's going to be a lot of cost. It's going to be cost more to maintain that system than it is to maintain the system that I already have. To put it in perspective, if you don't buy the filling kits, and you don't buy the sealant, and you don't buy the rim tape, and you don't buy the valves, okay, for the tubeless system, and you just buy a tubeless tire, so the tubeless tire costs more or the same as a clincher tire and the most expensive TPU tube that I buy. And that's all I need for my current system, because the tube comes with its own valve, it doesn't require any sealant, and the rim tape, even if the rim tape's in relatively poor condition, generally you can get away with it with a tube system. Okay folks, just a quick word on rim tape. So if you're using a tubeless system, you'll have tubeless rim tape. This stuff is incredibly fine and thin usually. And usually you can't put more than one layer on your wheel, because if you try and double it up, you end up making life really difficult for yourself with seating the tires. So you put one layer on your rim, and after about 2 years, I have found personally, this kind of rim tape usually withers and it gets old and it fails. So around the spoke holes on the internal of the rim, you will find that it basically pops through. So that's pretty annoying. So about 2 years you get out of this. This stuff is $10 per wheel because it's $5 per meter, and you need 2 meters to cover a 700C wheel. So that's $10 per wheel. This and this stuff is a lot cheaper. This is for clincher setups. This one is $11 for 2, and this is about similar price as well per meter. And these kind of ones, this one's an adhesive one, but this one isn't. This is just like a fabric-y like material that stretches over your rim. These kind of high pressure tapes for clincher systems last forever. Like if you buy this stuff, you don't have to worry about it in 2 years. You don't have to worry about it in 6 years. You don't even have to worry about it in 10 years. I've seen this stuff just last forever and ever and ever. So there's a big disparity here between what you get for the money and what you could get if you just stuck with tubes. Like when was the last time you replaced your tube tape? It hardly ever happens. Now, yes, it can fail, but it's a lot rarer than this stuff failing. The other thing is, if you don't seat this well on your tubeless rim, the glue gets down the gaps and underneath it and you get a leak. So you'll have to undo it all and throw it all away, and it's a very messy and disgusting process. But there you go, just a quick word on the rim tape. So quick back of the envelope calculation. For the tires that I use, which is the GP 5000s, it would cost me an additional £10 per tire, so that's £20 extra per bike for the tires. Then the 120 millilitres of sealant would cost me about £8. The rim tape, the tubeless rim tape, would cost me an additional £12 for 2 wheels, and the valves would cost me £11 for 2. So it's an additional £51 per bicycle I would need to spend on top of what I'm already paying on clincher tires, and that would be about 90 Brunei dollars in my money. And that is not including any additional kit like a bike-specific tubeless puncture repair kit or a tubeless bike pump that may be needed to make the system work. Right, now we come to time. So to change an inner tube, okay, at the side of the road in an emergency where I'm going as fast as possible, takes me about a minute. If I'm going a little bit slower, taking my time, might take me 5 minutes. You cannot do the same with a tubeless system. Okay, when you're setting up tubeless, it's going to take you at least 10 to 15 minutes minimum if you're good at it. And at the side of the road, if you get a cut or a hole in your tubeless system that will not seal, if you do get that possibility, it's going to take you way longer and it's going to be way messier to sort out. I'll give you an example. I was riding a few months ago with a group of other riders. There was about 6 of us in the group. I was 2 riders back in the group from the guy who got the puncture. He hit something in the road. It was a piece of glass or metal, and it put a small slit in his tubeless tire. It was a giant bike. It was a giant tubeless tire. And the thing starts spewing sealant everywhere. He gets sealant all the way up his back, all the way over the back of his bike, all over his shoes, all over the rear triangle of the bike. The guy behind him gets sealant all the way head to toe, all the way in the face, helmet, hair, everything. There's sealant everywhere. We get showered in sealant, which I think personally is very antisocial. And I think it's way more antisocial than just getting a flat with a tube. And I don't actually like to be behind people running tubeless systems for that reason. Because if they do get something that doesn't seal, I'm going to get a load of tubeless sealant in the face. And I don't like that. It's annoying and it's unpleasant. Anyway, we all pull over. Everybody's covered in sealant. His tire's completely flat. And we say, okay, what we're going to do now? Because we've got sealant leaking all over the place. Very messy job. Nobody wants to touch it, including me. And I do this for a living. I'm like, come on, it's my day off. I'm riding here. I don't want to have to do bike work. And the guy doesn't have any tire, any spare inner tube. Now, with tubeless, they recommend you actually carry a spare inner tube, which I've always thought is kind of pointless. Like, I'm trying to get away from carrying these if I go tubeless, but they actually recommend you carry one anyway in case your tubeless doesn't seal. He didn't have an extra one, okay? So he was left in a situation where he just ended up calling his wife, and his wife came and picked him up. Now, yes, one of us could have lent him a tube, but he didn't even want to touch his own bike at that point. It was too messy. It was too much of a mess, too much hassle. So basically his ride was done. If he had been running inner tubes, we could have fixed that stuff in 5 minutes and been on our way again and continued the ride. We were halfway through the ride, by the way. So he lost out on a ride because he used a tubeless system. Now, if it had been a small puncture, yeah, sure. He could have continued, probably not even noticed. But the same can be said for these things. If it's a small puncture, these go down very slowly anyway. You might not even notice you've got a puncture till you get home. And if it does go down, 5 minutes or less, 1 or 2 minutes in fact, to replace the inner tube and pull out the piece of metal or glass. So, like I'm saying, convenience-wise, for me, and also social-wise, like I think tubeless is very antisocial when it goes bad. There's no comparison. I'd much rather be dealing with this than dealing with glue on my hands, on my face, all up and down my kit, all up and down my bike at the side of the road. I've also got customers who fitted tubeless tires, put the sealant in, went to bed, came down the next morning, and the bike has just exploded all over the carpet. And they've got tubeless sealant set into the carpet, leaking all over the floor. It happens, okay? So they are way more difficult to set up, and when they go wrong, they take way more time to fix. And as I said before, you've got to do maintenance on a tubeless system. People believe, because of what they've been told by GCN and, like I say, the other industry shills, that once you go tubeless, that's the end of it. You never need to worry about it again. No, you do. You need to monitor the sealant, because the sealant is in a body of air within the tire. So it's slowly coagulating over time. And eventually you're going to have to replace that sealant. Eventually you're going to have to top it up. And like I say, the more humid environment you live in, like where I live, which is very humid in Southeast Asia, you've got to do that minimum every 6 months. So again, time-wise, cost-wise, tubes win again. Okay, folks, now we're going to talk about performance, which is a really important area for me. And what the industry shills and the likes of GCM will tell you is that tubeless is faster and lighter than a tubed system. And if they're talking about butyl tubes, standard butyl tubes in a standard clincher tire, they might be half right, but they are ignoring the other options, for example, TPU and latex. So I'm going to show you now that actually tubeless is possibly the worst choice for performance. So this is a chart I pulled off bicyclerolling-resistance.com, and they were doing a test with the Schwabe tires. And if you notice, the top one is the tubeless tire on a wheel, and the bottom one is the standard butyl tube, and then you've got the latex and the lightweight butyl. And you'll actually notice that the tubeless tire on a wheel is heavier than all the other systems. Now, granted, it's only 1 gram heavier than the standard butyl tube, but that means that the tubeless tire is heavier than all the others, including the latex, including the lightweight tube. TPU was not used in this test. Now, here's what's really interesting. For this test, as you can see from this chart, they did not use any sealant in the tyre. So this is a tubeless tyre without sealant. The recommended amount of sealant for a tubeless setup is 30 millilitres, which weighs about 30 grams. So you can add an additional 30 grams to the tubeless setup, which makes it 31 grams heavier than a standard butyl tube and tyre. Now when we check the weights against my system, so I'm using a GP5000, let's pick the 25mm one for example, which weighs 220 grams in the clincher version. And then I add a TPU tube of 24 grams. That gives me a total system weight of 244 grams. Now, if I take the GP5000, which is tubeless, that weighs 300 grams plus 30 grams of sealant, that comes to 336 grams. So the system that I am using versus a tubeless system that I may switch to, I am saving 92 grams per wheel. So basically tubeless is the heaviest system against all the others, and if it's heavier, that means it's going to be slower accelerating on your wheel set, and it's also going to not climb as well. You know, you're just carrying extra weight, so when you go uphill, you will be slower. Now, I can hear some people saying, well, what about rolling resistance? Because if the rolling resistance for tubeless is amazing, then surely that will negate any disadvantage it has for being heaviest. So if we look at the rolling resistance data of those tyres that I mentioned previously, we can see that the latex tube at 100 psi, for example, is 11.1 watts. The lightweight butyl tube is 11.9 watts. And then coming in third is the tubeless system at 12.5, and only 0.3 of a watt behind is the standard butyl tube. So both lightweight butyl and latex tubes are superior in rolling resistance to tubeless, and a basic butyl tube is not far behind at only 0.3 of a watt slower than tubeless. And don't forget, during this test, they did not put any tubeless sealant in the tubeless wheel. It was just an empty tyre. So if you then add sealant, that may in fact reduce the time even further between a butyl tube and a tubeless setup. The final question is, where do TPU tubes come with regards to rolling resistance? And if we look at this chart here that I found on bicyclerollingresistance.com, which is another study into latex tubes versus TPU tubes, there's a huge variety here of TPU brands. It goes much further down the page as well, but we are mostly interested in the Ride Now ones because that's the ones I use. And you can see they tested the 36 gram Ride Now tubes versus the 25mm latex, and it came to 9.5 for the latex and 10 for the Ride Now. So that's a loss of 10 watts for the Ride Now and a loss of 9.5 for the latex. So a difference of only half a watt, which is not massive at all. It certainly places the Ride Now tube significantly better than the tubeless system for sure, and very close indeed to the latex. We know that the tubeless system was, in the previous test, was over a watt slower than latex. Now here's the thing, this is the 36 gram tube. The 24 gram tube as of yet has not been tested on this scale. So I'd be very interested to see how that one would do. You can see there's a 22 gram tube on here from Tubelino that does, well, exactly the same as the 36 gram Ride Now, 10 watts. But even higher up the scale, there's that Revolup Ultra. That's 25 grams, so very close to 24, and that does a 9.8. But what we can be sure of is that a TPU tube is extremely close in rolling resistance to latex, and definitely faster than tubeless. Okay folks, let's sum up this video with a little bit about safety. The first word I would say on safety is this is a clincher tyre with a hooked rim and an inner tube. Granted, the inner tube is a modern TPU tube, but I've been using this system, hooked tyre, hooked rim, inner tube, for over 20 years. I couldn't tell you exactly how much, but I definitely know it's more than 20 years. It might be 25 years. It might be more than that. And so I am very much used to this system. And what that means is when this system fails me, I know what that feels like. I know how that handles when I'm at high speed on the road and all of a sudden I get a sidewall cut or I get a blowout or whatever. I know how that feels, I know how to handle that, and I know how to respond on my bike safely in order to avert any serious situation. If I was to switch to tubeless, I would have to start my education again, and that is quite difficult. Imagine a soldier, okay, who his entire military career has had one particular rifle. Now, that rifle might not be the best rifle in the world, but if the day before a big battle, you take that rifle away from him that he's used for like 15 years, and you give him a brand new rifle, ultra modern, with all the mod cons on it, you know, night vision and all that business, and this rifle is the cutting edge of technology, but he's got no experience of that rifle at all, and then you send him into battle, do you think he's going to do better or worse? He's going to go charging up to the enemy, press a button, and his magazine's going to drop out, you know? So just like in that clip from Mars Attacks. So the point I'm trying to make here is the fact that I'm experienced with this current system means I'm safe on this system. So safety sometimes is just being used to the system. A quick word now on hookless, because hookless is kind of part of this topic. So you've got hookless, tubeless setups. I think pretty much everybody can agree, you know, whether they be an experienced rider like Durian Rider, whether they be, you know, somebody experienced in the bicycle industry on the front lines like myself or GC Performance, or whether they be an experienced, knowledgeable engineer like Pete Tork. Pretty much everybody agrees, number one, hookless is a bad idea for road bike. Number two, anything over like 75, 80 PSI is dangerous for hookless. And the whole system was purely designed to make the manufacturer's life easier. It was designed to make production of wheels cheaper and faster. And it was sold to consumers as a benefit to them, but in fact it's not, and it is actually dangerous. And we have seen hookless fail multiple times in everything from the Paris-Roubaix to time trials. And when it fails, it totally unseats the tire from the rim, and you're left running on the edge of a metal or carbon rim on concrete, which is very bad news for your rim, but also very bad news for your ability to grip the road surface and come to a safe stop. As for general, you know, tubeless setups, there's a few issues that I've noticed that I just want to cover. Watching all these bike shops have these problems with these tires blowing up and people criticizing the bike shops saying, oh, they clearly don't know what they're doing. These guys do this on a daily basis. So they definitely do know what they're doing. They've probably had many successes with this system. All they're doing is highlighting the failures by recording them and posting them online. And what it says to me is that if somebody in a bike shop who maybe does this several times a week is still making mistakes and still having these catastrophic failures, then can we expect somebody at home who maybe only does it once in a blue moon to get that setup correct, then be able to go for a ride and have it not fail on them at a critical moment? That's very concerning to me. Whereas tube and tire on a hooked rim is exceedingly easy to get right. The other thing, of course, is when one of those tubeless setups blows up in your face, because the air is contained inside the tire itself, not in a bladder, when that tire fails and blows off the rim, you get the full force of that air escaping, which is essentially like a bomb going off. So the decibel range of a tubeless tire failing is going to be much louder than the decibel range of a tube inside a tire failing, right? I've had plenty of latex and butyl tubes fail on me in the past. I've been pumping up my tires and I've trapped or pinched the tube and it's blown up. But it's blown up inside the tire. The tire has contained the explosion. So it's a lot safer that way than having a tire blow off a rim, release all its energy right in your face, and coupled with that, fire high pressure chemicals containing glue right into your eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, which I'm not a doctor, but I would imagine is not particularly healthy. So from a safety aspect, from that perspective, tube and tire is definitely safer. Two more points I want to make. Sidewalls. Sidewalls on tubeless tires are actually stiffer than the sidewalls on tubed tires. So if you have a GP 5000 like this, which is a clincher tyre, and you compare it with a GP5000 tubeless, they're going to be less supple. So what that means is, as the tyre is rolling down the road and deforming on various different features on the road surface, it's going to deform less with a tubeless tyre, which means in theory, the tyre is going to handle less well, okay? Because you want the tyre to deform so you can grip. If the tyre was like completely rigid, your grip would be rubbish. It's because the tyre can deform that your grip is improved, right? So if you have a tyre with a tougher sidewall that's less flexible, not only are you going to have a less comfortable ride, but you're also going to have less grip in a direct comparison with the same brand and type of tyre. Does that make sense? The final thought is this. I was watching a video the other night. I'd actually finished making this video and I just got this safety section to finish, and I was looking for images for this safety section. And I came across a video on YouTube by a guy called George Vargas, who runs Rev Cycling, which is a bike shop. And he's a very experienced bike mechanic and bike shop owner. And he's done multiple videos criticizing tubeless setups. And he's done multiple videos at the side of the road with failed tubeless setups, complaining about how hard it is to rectify issues with tubeless, okay? So this guy's experienced. He uses tubeless, or he has used tubeless for many years, but he made a really interesting point. If you fill up your tire with tubeless sealant, okay, in a tubeless setup, and then you leave your tire like this, standing against the wall of your house or hanging upon the wall, and you go away on holiday, or you don't ride this bike for a few months, and I've got like 4 bikes, and only 2 of them I ride regularly, so the other 2 are just hanging around with me. So I could have a bike on the wall, set up tubeless, and not ride it in months. All that sealant is just going to coagulate and set inside the tire. And then when I start rolling down the road, okay, with my rim, what's going to happen? Well, that lump of weight is now unbalancing the wheel. So if I'm going high speed down a hill with a bunch of sealant that's all glued into my rim, into my tire, every time I roll over that lump of sealant, not only is the tire not going to deform as well as the rest of the rim, which could affect my handling, but also the whole wheel is totally unbalanced now. Now you can easily balance a wheel with a tube and tire, because we all know where the weight pretty much is going to be. And you can just balance it out with small weights around the wheel. It's a very easy job to do. And a lot of professional riders or mechanics do that for their teams because their wheels are spinning at very high speed when they come down a mountain. But if you've got a bunch of glue in there, like I say, unbalancing the rim, that's going to really affect your handling in a dangerous way, actually. So there you go. With tubeless, you can't just set it up and leave it, hang it on the wall and forget about it. With a tube, I can. Thank you for watching my video, all about why I personally am not going to switch to tubeless. I'm sure I've got a lot of things, or said a lot of things that are going to upset people. If you're upset, please do write a comment. If you're interested and you enjoyed the video, do also write a comment. Thanks for watching, folks, as always. And when you're out riding, please stay safe.